Thank you, Minister. Sorry to keep you waiting. May we now invite you and our CEO to take your seat for the next segment as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have everybody's 100% attention. Before we do anything else, can we give a big round of applause once again to our guest of honor, Mr. Heng, and our CEO, Mr. Ismail. Thank you.
Fellow Propnexians, this has been the moment, and in fact, you know, this has been the highlight. In fact, we are so privileged to have Minister Heng, who has agreed, despite his busy schedule, to address and to say a few words, and at the same time, a little engagement for you to understand the macro and the bigger picture of in the real estate industry. Once again, thank you, sir. And I just would like to before I start any questions, maybe the first one will be just free for you to just say hello to our people and address them, and any of the things that you want to say before we start the first question.
Well, Ismail and the Propnex team, and all the propicians, right? Propnexians here. Well, first let me congratulate you on an excellent year, and also heartiest congratulations to our winners just now. And I'm very happy to see how Propnex is also expanding and forming very good partnerships around our ASEAN region. And I hope you continue to go even further. I'm very happy to see many young kids here too, and parents. I think this is a very important part of a family value. I'll just say that the finance minister's biggest problem. Those of you who have read the Zhao Bao knew that. Sometime back, I gave an interview. I said my biggest problem is first, time not enough, because there's always so many more things to do, but I'm happy to spend the time with you this morning. And second is money not enough. Yeah. So when I saw Ismail reporting the good results of Propnex, as well as many of you, I said, well, this is a good sign. Why? Because the more money Ismail and all of you make, the more taxes I collect. So please continue to work very hard and pay me more taxes.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. We are happy to pay double the amount of taxes what we paid the previous year, as long as we can earn double the amount. Yep. Good.
I look forward to that, Ismail.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Paying taxes is an honor and a privilege because you earn enough to pay, so that's good.
Yeah, truly I felt that way, and I think every year when I pay higher taxes, I really don't have any emotional agony paying, honest truth. Because the fact here is this, we pay a fraction of it. And I think, and it is indeed for the benefit of the society. Okay, so I'm going to ask the first question. I think the first question generally it is going to be about real estate. And we know one of the concerns that we had here is this. Is the government taking too active a role and to make sure that, I know the macro is a sustainable market, but are we taking too active a role to come out with cooling measures? And to an extent, from a layman perspective, they also tend to think the government maybe is interfering too much. Why don't let the normal demand and supply take its course? And is this the way it is going to be in the near future? The government taking a too active a role as far as the real estate market is concerned? And what's your view on this?
Well, I think that's a very important question. Now, I think many of you would know that I was Managing Director of the Monetary Authority of Singapore during the global financial crisis. And, the global financial crisis took place about 10 years after the Asian financial crisis. And in the Asian financial crisis, it was excessive borrowing in a wrong currency, which led to a big shutdown in the Asian economies, and many people suffered. And in the global financial crisis, the irony of it is that it happened in the most developed markets in the world, right? In the US and in Europe. And the worst thing is, it started actually with a big property problem, right? Because real estate values that were not worth that amount, was repackaged through financial engineering into products which got AAA rating, and they got sold to European markets. And when the crisis happened, it is not only the homeowners in America who suffered. They bought things which they could not afford, and then it was packaged into what was, highly rated assets, which were then sold to many European investors and all over the world. And the result is not just the bad results is not just in America or Europe, it's all over the world. And you have one of the worst global financial crises. So why is that so? Well, it is the nature of property, the nature of property cycles. Real asset value, which is a prediction about future value, goes through cycles. The global economy goes through cycle, and property goes through cycle as well. And I think many of you will be familiar with this term, irrational exuberance. That markets on its own can become very irrational because everybody says, prices are going up, going up, going up, and it can only go up further, so better buy, buy, buy. And the result is that the prices overshoot, and then when it comes down, it also overshoots. So you have huge cycles, which is not good for your business and not good for individuals. And that's why we are always careful that first, we have to ensure that our buyers do not suffer from the irrational exuberance. They don't end up thinking that there's only one way but up, and then in the end, when they suffer, it is not just they who suffer, but the entire family and many, many people. So I think it's important for us to bear that in mind, that it can be a good investment, but you have to think long term. It cannot be that, I'm trying to time my cycle at the ups and downs, and that's why we have to take action. And the other thing is that, property, unlike buying stocks and shares, for many people it's a home, and for which you are going to service for many, many years. And it's not, if they cannot afford it, it'll be a huge problem. Similarly, so other assets, you can be more relaxed about it. But in the case of property, it is a home, and for which, for many, many people, it is likely to be their biggest investment ever in their lifetime. So we have to take this seriously.
I can accept that from a macro perspective, sir, and you did explain even from the global perspective of in the past where people having to have the consequences of a meltdown. So put it the other way. What would have taken if last year there wasn't a cooling measure? I mean maybe I put it in another way here is this. What in the eyes of the authorities is sustainable? Because last year, the first 6 months, almost 7%, and it was going towards a double digit. Would you then say a 3 to 5% is sustainable? Or when will the government not come and interfere if it's deemed as sustainable?
Well, you asked a very hard question because as to, what is sustainable. It reminds me that when I was running a central bank, I used to go to Switzerland for central bank governors meeting. And seated next to me, because we're seated by alphabetical order, and I'm always seated next to the governor from Saudi Arabia. And the favorite question that was asked of him is, Governor, you are from Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer. Tell us what is the trend of oil prices. And he was an elderly gentleman. And he would smile and said, how would I know? They said, but you are the biggest oil producer, and you are part of the OPEC. Surely you know. So he got asked the question so many times that once he brought a magazine, and this was a very famous international magazine. And on the cover of the magazine was oil at $5. Yeah. Because there was a prediction that there was such a global oversupply of oil that oil will be up at $5. And immediately, a few months after this magazine was published as the lead story, front page story, oil prices went up to beyond $50 because OPEC came in, they reduced supply. And they said, well, it is a fool's game to try and predict how oil prices would go up or down. But if you ask me, on a long-term basis, what would be a sustainable rate of increase? Now, all long-dated assets, property included, derive their value from the discounted future cash flow of earnings. And in this case, for property, it will be the value of rental that one could get over a lifetime. And at the end of it, it must be the rate of economic growth and the rate of wage growth. So how much can we expect our wages to go up so that we can continue to afford a house? How far would the economy grow? And how much will the population grow? Those are long-term factors which we can predict. And the key to that is, first and foremost, will Singapore still be there as a country, right? If it is going to be there, yes, the property value will have some value. And that's why, our young men and women and all the men here doing national service is important, because if the country is still there, it's a sovereign nation, and therefore we must take defense seriously. Two, will the economy continue to grow? If the economy collapses, like what happened during the Asian financial crisis, global financial crisis, values just went down significantly. And three, what are people's expectation of what will be the long-term economic growth? If I see that long-term economic growth is zero, the value of the property cannot rise very much. And that's why many of the things that we do is really for us to ensure that we have sustainable long-term growth. So in addition to my job as Minister for Finance, I'm also chairman of our Future Economy Council, where we have to look at how do we continue to sustain the growth of our economy. I'm also chairman of our National Research Foundation, so we're putting money into R&D in order to help all the different industries transform. And the importance of industry transformation is critical. Many, many years ago, when I was a kid, if you want to buy anything, it's your neighborhood provision shop. That's the only place available. Today, people buy everything online. So what used to be, a little neighborhood shop that's completely protected from competition is no longer so. You and I, as consumers, want the best and the cheapest. And we are buying not just from the shop in our neighborhood, we are buying from everywhere around the world. Yep. So you see all the online purchases and so on. It's a trend that you and I, if you tell Singapore consumers, don't ever buy online, I think you will get a big problem. Everybody wants the best, right? Yep. So it will happen. Now, then what happens to our neighborhood shop? We are thinking hard about what to do. Next to my office is Funan, the digital mall. Those of you who are old enough will remember that as students, we go to the digital mall to buy computers, right? Laptops and all that. Today, it's all online. Yep. So what is Funan doing? They knocked down the entire building to create now an experience mall. So I've been complaining that they created so much noise in my office because every day I hear pong, pong, pong. So they felt very embarrassed. They've been briefing me on what they're going to do and promising that this will be a great lifestyle mall and your staff will be very happy at the end of this. So I'm looking forward to that. But things change. Yep. And we have to accept the changes. But the question is, can we be creative about creating the next business model for us to do better?
Thank you so much, sir. I think the key message is sustainability. Sustainability being a rental yield, and the future generation can continue to afford. Any growth that is too far exceed may not be the right thing because it does affect. So get the message, sir. Okay, I want to come back something which is a bit more closer, public housing. Yep. Many of my agents, many of our salespeople, and actually even though we said that we have got more than 40%, to be very precise, we have got 48% of public housing market. And that's huge. One of the key things here is this. A problem that was raised about the dropping lease, the leasehold of an aging public housing property, and it has also become, to an extent, very much political last year when our Prime Minister had to address the issues about concerns in the market. And a lot of issues are also in the near future, late future. Maybe you who will have to solve some of these concerns as far as policies are concerned. If all of us know time to come, you will be heading more responsibility. Yeah. So what do you think about the public housing dropping lease, and what is their future for Singaporeans owning such properties?
Well, thanks, Ismail, for the question. Your question reminds me of, when I was running the Monetary Authority, I had to travel quite a lot. So on one trip, I was traveling to one of the key cities in the Asian region, which I shall not name. So that evening, one of my staff who was with me on the trip said, Mr. Heng, this evening, there's no official program, so can I go and run an errand? I said, yeah, go ahead, you're not needed for the work, go ahead. Then she told me, I have to run an errand for my grandma. I said, oh, that's very nice of you. You're so close to grandma, you're running an errand. I said, what are you going to do? I said, my grandma had a boyfriend when she was young. I said, your grandma still remember your boyfriend? He said, yeah. After so many years. And he said, when they were courting, boyfriend said, let's get out of Singapore. There are more opportunities elsewhere. So he came to this city that we are in today. And after so many years, grandma still thinks of him from time to time and said, please go and check whether he's still alive and what is his life now. So I said, important mission, please go ahead and do it. Next morning, I met her and the other staff over breakfast. And I said, how was your trip? I said, I found grandma's old boyfriend. But, I feel so sad. I said, why? I don't know what to tell grandma. Grandma's old boyfriend is living in a rented unit. He's been living there for years. It is a small, tiny little unit. And, he is poor and barely sustaining himself. And when I look at the house that he was renting, I felt so sad. So I said, why? He said, well, I'm so glad my grandma stayed back in Singapore. Not because, then I came out of that chain, right? But grandma bought a HDB flat, when she got married, and thereafter, she upgraded to another flat. And the family has been living together. Grandma's children and grandchildren all own their own HDB flats. They're all staying in HDB. They all own HDB. And grandma's flat that she bought is now worth, and that was almost 20 years ago, is worth hundreds of thousands. And grandma has the option to do what she wants with the house. Grandma's boyfriend is living in a rental unit. And I said, oh dear, what are you going to tell grandma? I said, I don't know what to say to her. But maybe I'll just say something nice that at least the boyfriend is alive. Yeah. Now, I share this story because when you think about it, the one big policy that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his team of people did for all Singaporeans was to have this compulsory CPF savings, and from there, you can use it to buy a house, and that so many of our citizens own a property. And as I said, we have to look at property not in the short run, but in the long run as to how the economy is growing and how wages are going up. So in the earlier years, our GDP was growing significantly, 8, 10, 12%. And that is the reason why the government had the ability to build all these houses, and that's why our citizens have the ability to buy those houses. And as I said earlier, you asked me about long-term property trend. Property prices depends on economic growth. So in the earlier years, when our economy was growing strongly, property prices shot up. Now, who owns those property? Our citizen. And as a result of which, many of our citizens now have a nest egg. Right? Not only do our citizens have a nest egg, I as finance minister have a nest egg because previous finance ministers did not just anyhow spend the money, but we kept it as reserves. So how many of you know that this year's budget and last year's budget, the returns, 50% of the returns from our reserve, known as net investment returns contribution, is the biggest source of revenue for our expenditure. More than GST, more than income tax, more than corporate tax. Which means that even if I double GST or double corporate tax or double income tax, I still won't have enough if not for this big sum that we get. And it's 50% of our return. So we are very lucky that in the earlier years, in the first 30 years in particular of our independence, when the economy was growing strongly, many of our people bought property. The government was careful in the spending, and now the government has a nest egg which we are now spending for our people, and our people have a nest egg in the form of a house. And compared to my staff's old boyfriend who was still suffering in the rental unit. And that's the reason, by the way, why we have fewer tycoons in Singapore than many other cities. Now, as to a question, right? So it's very important for us to recognize about this lease. Now, let's imagine that today you are a 25-year-old and you decide to get married and buy a flat at the age of 25. Our latest data on life expectancy is 85, which means that you buy a 99-year property, and you stay from 25 to you are 85, right? 60 years. And 60 years, you still have 33 years left. Is there still value in the flat? Yes. Absolutely, right? So this debate that is going on that, no, this is a terrible hoax. Property, this is macam rental. I mean, come on, get real. At the age of 85, you decide whether you want to pass on the property to your children. You decide what you want to do with it. There's still value in that property. What is the value of the property? It depends on how well the economy continues to grow. But there will be value in the property. It's not going to go to zero when you are 85. And two, even if you decide that earlier, instead of waiting I'm 85 and do something about it, I decide to do a lease buyback. I decide to move to a smaller property because my children are all grown up. So why do I need a 5-room or a 4-room? I don't need 3 bedrooms anymore. It's only husband and wife, old couple. I've seen many of my residents move into a studio apartment, and they're happier because they say, well, look, it's easier to maintain, easier to clean, and just 2 of us, and I'm happy to live with neighbors who are about our age. We do things together, and yet I get value out of that flat. So I think it's important for us to see that in perspective.
Yep. Ken, sir, we agree. At the end of the day, Singapore being small, 99-year lease, whether it's HDB or private property, one day it will have to expire so that the subsequent generation will continue to have land, and we are supportive of that. Yep, and we are positive about that.
By the way, I should share with you a story. Just 2 weeks back, I was in a session like this, a smaller one, of course, and somebody said, Mr. Heng, it's the fact that we have 99-year lease and indication that the government thinks that Singapore can only last 99 years. Then somebody came out and said, no, it is because we believe that Singapore will last forever. That's why you have 99-year lease. So I asked the gentleman, I said, can you please explain? He said exactly what Ismail just said. At the end of 99 years, the property can be recycled, and you find that you can have new users for it. And that is why for our industrial estate, the leases are even shorter. The reason is that the industry will change and transform. And if somebody owns a land and decides that, I'm going to sit on it forever, I'm going to do nothing, you cannot do anything. And the economy will not grow. Our young people will have no opportunity to buy. So if I sit on a, HDB is freehold property, lasts forever, then what will happen? It means that the next group of people can never buy unless they buy a resale. And it's because we think that Singapore will last, we hope, forever, that we have a policy that we can continue to recycle and that the land can be put to better and better users.
Yep. Thank you, sir. The next question I'm going to ask you here is something that came from a couple of my salespeople. Yep. I think we were talking a lot of macro, then they say, yeah, tell me, what do I, can something for me? Yep. I'm not, it's more of a suggestion, but probably you may not have an answer immediately. It's perfectly all right. But at least if you can say whether this could be addressed and re-looked into it. One of the biggest challenge for salespeople are they are not fixed salaried. And therefore, being on a commission base, the current TDSR requirement here is this. If they want to take a loan or mortgage, they will have a 30% haircut, which means if my salesperson earned $100,000 in the eyes of a financial institution with a 30% haircut, is only annual $70,000. And therefore he get a lesser amount of, and then you take the 70,000 with the TDSRs, everything goes down. The request that they say from a logical perspective, and we can also understand why commission earners are subjected to a haircut, because it is not consistent economy market. But yeah, the request here, if as a salesperson consistently for the last 2 or 3 years I earn 100, 100, 100, because that's the capacity I want to work. People earn 200, but I want to work consistently 100, 100, 100. It has been proven. Can I not be subjected to the haircut based on my previous year's consistency? Because after all, fixed wages, no guarantee. Tomorrow he'll lose a job and he's jobless. And they say that as salespeople, we are never jobless. It's just that whether we earn the income or not. So that being the case is... Yeah, thank you. So the actual request here is the current 30% haircut seems to be a bit tough on freelancers and commission earners. Is it something makes sense for us to put this forward as a request?
You are always welcome to put forward the request. But as to what the Ministry of National Development, would do on this matter, it is for the ministry to consider. I do understand the challenge that you face. But again, I think it goes back to what I said earlier on, that at the end of the day, it is what is sustainable. Because if it so happened that and I mentioned earlier on, that the property goes through cycle. There will be up period and down period. There will be periods for which you are doing extremely well because property prices are going up. And at some point, the property cycle comes down. The economy goes up, the economy goes down. So the so-called haircut is really more like an averaging, that over a period of time, what is the correct averaging? And I think what will be the correct averaging depends very much on what we see, with more experience, with more data, you can see whether 30% is excessive or whether it should be 40%, whether it should be 20%. And we've got to look at the data, number one. Number two, even for every one of us, at the end of the day, the question is it better to look at something for which you have some margin of error, margin of safety? This is not to encourage everybody to be completely risk averse and say, I will never buy stocks or I will never buy something because it will come down. I mean, there is a difference between putting money in a fixed deposit for which is safe, relatively safe, and for which you earn low return, and buying equities for which you earn an equity premium. So there is room for a diversified portfolio for most people, and including property. But for the biggest item that any one of us will probably have, which is a house, any particular house that we live in, you don't want to end up with so little margin that anything happens, the whole family, including the children and all that, will be in a bad shape. So what is the right margin of error? What is the right margin of safety? I say we'll have to continue to study. And if you have evidence to show that, the margin of safety is a bit too excessive, I'm sure that the ministry will review it.
Good, sir. We will put up another paper. Yep. Yeah. So, fine. So I think I'll just
this is the most popular topic.
Okay. I think I will just go back to real estate question again. Simply because we have seen, because Propnex, with our partnership with JLL and as well as our international offices and so on, we do sell a huge number of overseas properties as well. We do sell properties from Japan, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, UK, Australia, Vietnam. Yep. So, and we also notice Singaporeans more number of salespeople, consumers and Singaporeans by and large are prepared to invest in Manila, for that matter, because it's only $100,000 to $200,000, or in Bangkok or Cambodia, even developing countries. And one of the push factor here is our ABSD for the second and third properties. And we are actually very, very concerned, because in some of these investments, even though we do some due diligence, there's no guarantee that country's economy, the security, the stability of the government, and so much so some of the Singaporeans' future retirement funds may be at risk. And mainly the push factor is because of hefty ABSD for Singaporean to own a second property within our own island, Singapore. Is this something seriously worth considering, calibrating for the Singaporeans' interests of the current cooling measures?
Well, first, I think your point about, be careful about investing in overseas property, that you have to take into account a whole range of issues like, security, the government's position, whether policies may change, and the currency fluctuations that take place, and so on. All those are very relevant considerations, and I would certainly say that indeed all property buyers will need to be careful. In fact, in all investments, whether it is property, stocks, or bonds, in a foreign currency unit, you'll have to take into account all those factors. But property happen to be a big item, and therefore you have to consider even more carefully. Now, would it be a good idea for us to encourage Singaporeans to buy, therefore, don't buy overseas property, buy properties only at home, because there's less of a currency problem and so on? Again, the answer goes back to what is a sustainable demand. Right? I know many people buy property and say, well, I can rent it out. But how many property you can rent out depends ultimately on the population in Singapore. Depends on how many people want to rent. Most Singaporeans own their own property. You can buy a HDB or can buy a condo. And at the end of it, the people who are likely to rent property are people who come in for short leases. They are coming here to work and so on. So there is a natural limit to how far it can grow. Now, in terms of overseas buyers, there are plenty of overseas buyers. I look at the property prices in the key cities, even just within Asia, and I meet many of these business people overseas. And the common thing that they tell me is, oh, Mr. Heng, Singapore property, cheap, cheap, cheap. So we can buy more, because compared to all the key cities, we are really still quite affordable. And therefore, the cooling measures are necessary, because if we open up our market completely, I think will be in for a huge surge. And in the end, our property prices will be driven not by our own fundamentals, but by fundamentals by changes in the region. And if there's a speculative wave in our region, you'll find that we will be subject to that speculative wave. So it's not in Singaporeans' interest in the long run to have that. You can make a quick short-term buck. Some people will become rich by doing that, but ultimately many people are going to suffer. So it's not something that we. So the other thing is, for Singaporeans' investment, so where do I invest? I don't want to just put money in the bank, and that's why I think having a diversified portfolio is important. Whether you are going to buy, a portfolio of bonds, equities, combining with some real estate, I think it's up to Singaporeans to decide on that, and you could do that quite wisely by having a diversified portfolio.
Okay, sir. I will move away from all real estate questions as far as cooling measures and ABSDs and so on. But having said that, what I will just say here is this. The recent paper that we put up and we sent to MND and as well as to your office is simply something that I don't need an answer today, neither it is. It only comes from our ground feedback that some calibration for Singaporeans, facilitation of upgrading. In fact, we are not even asking at this juncture because of the recent reissue cases of OTP. And this whole reissue by Credit Suisse, when they highlighted this thing, was because of the increase of the stamp duty from 7% to 12%. What happened here is this: many of the HDB upgraders who wants to buy a private property, in the absence of EC, there are lesser number of ECs in the market. And this is the true aspirations of Singaporean wanting to buy. But unfortunately, they are caught with a 12% to pay first, but they can get a refund. But you know, generally, and we noticed that in some of the new launches, the take-up rate is less than 10%. And we are talking about development with 1,400 units, less than 5%. And these developments are really in the hinterland of public housing. So one of the major consideration here is situations like this, if we can further calibrate just to facilitate, it would be a great help for Singaporeans at large to upgrade towards their aspirations. Yep. I mean, this is just a comment. If you want to say something, it's okay. If not, we will just hear from you in some time later.
I will leave MND to consider that.
Okay, fine. Good, sir. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Okay, I want to come to the question here is this. Maybe before I go on, how's your health right now? That there was a little bit of a scare to huge number of us when we heard, and subsequently, again, media says that you have rebounded and you're strong. And how do you feel in terms of your health, actually?
Well, Isma, how do you feel about my health now?
Generally, you very radiant, very positive, and I think we have great confidence. But maybe would you like to say, and maybe you should also tell us how health is so important to all of us now that you have experienced.
Well, I've experienced literally a life and death experience, and I must say that I have been very, very lucky if you are not religious, and very blessed if you are religious. And I'm very touched that you know, I met so many different religious groups, including those in the interreligious organization. I was there at one event, and somebody said, you know, one group came out to me and said, "Mr. Heng, we prayed for you." And the second group said, "We also prayed for you, and we also prayed for you." So regardless of race, language, or religion, I've been blessed by so many different groups. And it was, you know, I'm very touched by the support that Singaporeans showed, because I had so many well wishers, cards, and flowers that were sent to me when I was hospitalized, that you know, it's really, really very moving for me. Now, first of all, for me, it was an extremely, it was a close shave, because I collapsed at a cabinet meeting, and luckily in the cabinet we have some doctors, there were several doctors, and one of them, Dr. Janio, happened to be an expert in looking after babies in emergency. So he gave me very good first aid. The ambulance crew gave me extremely good support, and when I went to Tan Tock Seng, they were able to deal with me almost immediately, because it so happened that the surgeon was on duty and he has not gone home. And I recovered quite well. One of the things which our hospitals are doing a great job is that a group of them, because when you are in ICU and you're motionless for a number of days, your body starts to lose its function. The muscles wear off very quickly. You could hardly sit or walk, because the muscles, the nature of the body is such that if you don't use it, you lose it. And by the time I was awake, you know, I recovered. Because I had a very bad lung infection, because I caught very vicious bacteria, which was attacking my lungs, and my lungs also was almost gone, you know. And luckily, they said, "Well, you're lucky that your heart was able to take the medications, and glad that you were exercising." And at the end of it, I also managed to deal with the lung problem. And after that, I was not allowed to go out in a public place for almost a year, because they say if you catch a cold, you're going to be back in the hospital and you're going to be worse. So it is a real traumatic experience. Of course, the person who suffered the most was not me, was my wife, not knowing whether I'll be dead or alive. And she asked the doctor, what will happen to him? So we don't know, we can't tell, right? First, whether he'll be dead or alive. Two, when he wakes up, whether he will change personality, whether he will recognize you. Yeah. So it is really a traumatic experience. But I'm very touched by, first, the dedication of our medical team in our hospital, and two, the support of so many Singaporeans, and of course, my family's great support. Now, after that, I asked my doctors, I said, am I at a particular risk? Why me? I've been exercising. So my doctor said, well, unfortunately, low risk does not mean no risk, right? And that was the tagline that we used when I was in the police force. Singapore is low crime, but doesn't mean it's completely no crime, right? So you still got to take precautions. So my suggestion to everybody is that please take good care of your health. Don't work too hard. In fact, I was suggesting to Ismail just now. I say, you should. You have your productivity app, right? Maybe part of your productivity app, you should add in something like a Fitbit sort of thing, and say, our property agents walk how many thousands of steps every day in order to close a sale. So you are also exercising while you are doing your sales. When you're taking clients to see a property, if you're taking a bus, drop one bus stop earlier and just walk. If you are driving, go find a parking space that is free parking and just walk. Yeah, so you save money and exercise at the same time. But seriously, I think we do need to take care of our diet. I eat less now, so I feel a lot healthier. I do more exercise, practically every day especially if I don't have night meetings. And just to make sure that you don't take health for granted. It's very easy to take things that are in our life for granted, whether it's our own health or our loved ones. And so don't take things for granted. Just keep at it.
Thank you so much for sharing something very personal about what you have gone through, a traumatic experience. But having said that, we are so thankful, blessed, and we wish you tremendous great health as you lead us to the generations in terms of policies for all of us to grow and to be happy. One last question, and this is the final question, sir. What's in your eyes the role of salesperson? How important are they in all things put together in the Singapore's economy? And what should they be focusing on moving forward to stay relevant as a salesperson?
Well, I think, first of all, let me say, how does every one of us stay relevant? And I think every one of us stays relevant, whether you are doing sales or you are doing an office job, you are working in a factory. At the end of the day, it's really about how do we be valuable to other people. Right? What is the value that we are creating, that we are adding? And the one big challenge that all of us, the whole world will be facing is, first, the big wave of globalization, and second, the advances of technology. And where you see this most obviously is the stress that this has created for our neighborhood shops. Right? It used to be, as I mentioned earlier, you go to a provision shop, and provision shop supplies you with practically everything. But today, so many of our residents, so many of our people will just buy things online. So it's no longer possible to just pretend that nothing will happen and that life will just go on as normal. I've been visiting factories quite a lot, and the other day I went to a factory where the entire factory was almost run by robots in Singapore. I've been looking at the TV programs about China. So I've been looking at Chinese factories. I'd be very surprised at how many robots they have. So at first I thought, did they have so many robots? So I checked up. The International Association of Robots, or Federation of Robots, keeps data on the number of robots each country uses. And interestingly, the country with the most human beings is also the country with the most robots. because China is also facing an aging population. So they are really in a great hurry to make sure that we grow rich before we grow old. And therefore, huge number of robots are now. Now, what does that mean for us? You know, what it means is that if I'm working in a factory, I'm contending not just with workers all over the world, but now with robots all over the world. So what is it that I can do that the robots cannot do? So in the same way, this morning I hear that you're all very excited about having a 24/7 PA, right? Your app, and does that what does that mean? Because as workers, you want to have the best app that you can to help you to be more productive, right? And the people who are doing jobs which can be done by an app are now no longer needed. So does that mean that you have no job? I don't think so. I think it's a question of what is it that we can do that will be special, that cannot be taken over by a machine. So I was reading this thing about, will drivers be out of job? And there was a very interesting article that there are drivers and there are drivers. He thinks that school bus driver will not be out of a job. And the reason that this researcher came up with is that the school bus driver is not just driving a bus from point A to point B, but looking after the safety of the kids, making sure that the kids get up safely, is seated properly, and not something that can be easily robotized. The bus can be driven by a robot with all the sensors and probably more safely, but looking after the kids will still be an important part of the job. So jobs will have these features and how we change. So how do we add value as in sales? I'll say we have to think hard about how do we serve our clients better. And I'm very glad that Propnex has done quite so many interesting projects using digitalization, helping your agents to be more productive, having your app, and congratulations on that very progressive move. Now, the other thing which I think all our sales agents can do a lot of is that you asked me about the big picture questions, right? And I thank you for those questions. Now, at the end of the day, as a salesperson, you're also hoping that you help your clients make the right decision and that we all make the right decisions for Singapore. And as I said, if the property value, if there's one group of people who needs to think really long term, it should be our property agents. Because at the end of the day, whether property has value in Singapore depends on whether there's Singapore, right? If Singapore is taken over, Singapore is destroyed by a bomb, there's no Singapore, there's no property, right? If the Singapore's economy goes downhill, then land in Singapore has no value, because what economic value is there? Why do I want to go and build an industrial estate or commercial real estate in Singapore, or to buy a house in Singapore? Because nobody's going to come and invest in Singapore, and even Singaporeans will run away. So the question is, where will our economy continue to do well? And in turn, will our economy continue to do well depends on whether our society is doing well. One great value of Singapore, and I see that, your estate agent is a very multiracial, multi-religious set of agents, is for us to continue to maintain harmony in Singapore. So regardless of race, language, or religion that is in our pledge, we got to keep Singapore that way, a harmonious society. You see the huge amount of unhappiness all over the world, right? Even in France, they were trying so hard to, grow the economy and all that. And now you have the yellow vest. Just 2 days ago, you saw on the net amazing scenes of people looting in Paris, breaking down nice buildings and so on, because they felt that I've been left behind by globalization. So it's a big thing about globalization. My life has not improved. And they are taking it on various groups of people. So very tragically in Christchurch, you have this attack on Muslims, which is terrible. And so we stand in solidarity with that. I'm very glad that our religious organization and our Muslim organizations stood up and said, look, this is wrong. This is not what our religion is about. So I think we got to continue to make sure that as property agents, you all know about our ethnic integration policy and quotas and all that. These are important ways for us to maintain harmony of race, language, and religion. Now, in the short run, I'm quite sure there will be some people who are, inconvenienced and disadvantaged that I cannot sell to anybody I like. But in the long run, by maintaining that, we maintain value of the property. We maintain growth in the economy, we maintain harmony. And so it's not something that we can say, I do X, Y, or Z, but we do it together, have the big picture. And I hope that all of you, with the huge amount of training that you are doing, can help to also help our people understand why we got to look at the big picture, even though I'm just looking at buying or selling one property. Because that one property, its value depends on the bigger picture in Singapore.
Thank you so much, sir, for your candid sharing and explanation from the macro perspective and some of the concerns and some of the importance as salesperson to ensure the long-term sustainable growth of Singapore and every Singaporean. With that, can we give a round of applause before Minister gave a final two special award to two recipients. Yeah.
Thank you very much to our guest of honor and our CEO, Mr. Ismail. I would like to invite both gentlemen to join us back here at the main stage platform for the two awards.